Listen, have you ever felt like there was a gap between where you are and where you know you could be, or even a gap between where you are and where you should be? If you've ever experienced that, I want you to stay tuned to this video. I want to show you why that gap is there. It's probably not what you think, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what to do about it. And let's be very clear. My answer isn't working harder, because working harder only works if you're working hard on the right thing. Stay tuned. You know, I read this book a while ago, and this book introduced me to this concept called the principle of the path. And what the writer says is this. He says, it is direction, not intention, that determines destination. I was like, wow, that was very simple for me, but very profound, because sometimes I think we're operating with the assumption that if I've got good intentions, I'm going to end up at good destinations. And what he says is no, it's the principle of the path. It's the direction that you take, not the intentions that you have, that actually determine your destination. And when I think about many of us who are attempting to fulfill a purpose, we're attempting to carry out a vision that God's placed in our heart for our life, for someone we're supposed to become, or for something we're supposed to do. Very often, there's these gaps and these chasms that exist between where we are and where we, not just where we could be, but where we should be. And there's a reason for that, for those gaps, or for that gap. And I want to share two of them today. I'm going to spend time talking about one, but I want you to be aware of both of them. One of the reasons for that gap is simply God's timing. Season of announcement is not the season of fulfillment. In other words, the season that God show you something isn't always the season you're supposed to do something with it. Sometimes you get revelation of what you're supposed to do, not because you're supposed to immediately go into execution. Sometimes you get revelation of what you're supposed to do so you can go into preparation. In other words, sometimes God will show you in one way or another, hey, it's getting ready to rain, so that you can prepare like Noah to build an ark. What was building an ark? It was an act of preparation for the rain. So God didn't tell Noah it was going to rain, and then it rained in the same season, because the season of announcement is not always the season of fulfillment. And sometimes there's a gap between where you are, where you could be, where you are, where you should be, simply because of God's timing. And God's timing is God's kindness, which means his timetable is always the best timetable for you. It doesn't always feel good to you, but it is the best timetable for you. And so sometimes he's taking his time because there's something about it you're not ready for. There's something about it. It's like, for an example, when David, who defeated Goliath, started working in the palace with Saul, there was something about working in the palace that David had to be ready for. He had to be ready for that pressure. He had to be ready for Saul's insecurity. He had to be ready to literally dodge spears. Like Saul literally threw spears at him. He had to be ready for that, right? So sometimes there's something about the palace that God has to get us ready for. And then sometimes there's something about the palace that God's got to get ready for us. So his timing is his kindness. That's not what I want to talk about today, though. Because very often I think we can attribute that gap to God's timing, when sometimes the issue isn't God's timing, it's our tactics. It's not his timing, it's our tactics. It's not what God isn't doing, it's what we aren't doing. And here's what I think. I think we live in a culture and a climate that really does value hard work. Like grinding has become a cultural phenomenon now. Now, that's not my reality. I work hard. I think the Bible speaks to the importance of a biblical work ethic, but sacrificing what matters most to God in an attempt to pursue what matters most to us, you can call it what you want. The Bible calls it idolatry. I want you to sit, the pause is intentional. I want you to sit with that for a minute. When I invert God's priorities with my priorities, we can call it whatever we want. but the Bible would call that idolatry. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about idols, but it is possible to put the wrong thing on the altar, right? So our culture is like this. It's almost like encouraging us to work in ways that are inconsistent with divine design. God himself rested. He created the world and rested on the seventh day, not as a response to fatigue, but as a result of accomplishment. He models for us the way you create. So if he's creating in 6 and we're creating in 7, I mean, come on, listen, no, this is no shade, no slight to anybody. I'm just saying there's an aspect of grind culture that I think everyone can assume is the solution to the gap. If I just work harder, if I just work longer, if I just stay up late enough, then I can close that gap. But I am telling you, the difference between closing that gap, the issue, the answer to closing that gap isn't always working harder. Are there some people that aren't working hard enough? Of course. Does the Bible warn against laziness? Yes. It says that a person that's lazy is going to soon come to poverty. It says that the hands of the diligent will be made rich. So of course, the Bible talks about hard work, but here's the issue. The answer to closing that gap isn't working harder, it's working higher. Because working harder only works if you're working hard at the right thing. Here's what Proverbs says. It says, a wise man sharpens his axe before he cuts down a tree. Grind culture says, get to swinging. Kingdom culture says, get to sharpening. It says, a person with a dull axe must exert much strength. The tree may eventually come down, but they wore themselves down cutting the tree down. But a person who sharpens the axe, wise. So the issue isn't that I'm not working hard enough. The issue for many people is your standards aren't high enough. Now, a while ago, to me, and I feel like if you shouldn't put an event on if you don't believe in this. So I put on an event every year called Thrive. And it's not the Thrive Bible Study, but it is a faith-based personal development event. And I did a training a couple of years ago at Thrive called GPS. And I talked about goals, priorities, and standards. And that where people end up is based on their goals, which is the language, which is the vision. Goals are visions, vision described in increments. All right, their priorities, that's their values, which a lot of people aren't clear on. I was doing a teaching recently for, I lead a community, it's a certification program, it's Premier Certification Academy. And we believe God wants us to be the best at what we do, that we need to be good stewards of our potential. And so there are 3 academies in that program where we train and certify people in transformational coaching and in transformational speaking and leadership. And I was doing this training on leadership, and it was kind of centered around, I also mentioned like this whole idea of standards, and how standards are they're not like goals. Goals are the ceiling. Standards are the floor. Goals are like, this is what I want to achieve. Standards are, this is the least I'll allow. Right? And so what happens is, in that training, I was talking about the difference between ideal values, like what you want to matter most, and authentic values, what really matters the most. And sometimes what really matters the most is not what you want to matter the most. You got to align it. See, I think the same reality can take place with standards. Your standards aren't really most people's standards aren't what they think they are. See, your standards are the least you will allow from you and the least you will allow from others. My standard is excellent. So if it's not excellent, I'm not reaching my standards. I am not happy if it's not that I'm miserable, but I'm not happy if it's not excellence, because that's the least I allow from me. So if I'm speaking and I walk off a platform What matters most to me is how I feel about how I did. Not how they feel about how I did. I'm not saying that doesn't matter. What matters most to me is my sense of how God feels about how I did and how I feel about how I did, because I'm not living my life according to somebody else's standard. And for many people, the gap isn't being closed because the standard is actually too low. Because your standard is the least you allow of yourself and the least you allow of others. You got to hold yourself to a higher standard and hold others to a higher standard also. You don't always reach your goals. You don't always get your goals. You always get your standards. It's time to work higher, not harder.